You're probably a great example of being kicked so many times and still coming back to real estate and making the best out of it. How did you know it's gonna work?
I always opened my mindset up to collaboration. I encourage people how you get from one deal to the next, and it's important to have that circle of people who can teach you, walk with you, and grow with you.
Hello everyone and welcome back to the Path of Progress. I'm your host Alex Kononov, and today's guest is someone who's reshaping how investors scale their real estate business through smart systems and creative strategies. I'm excited to sit down with Angel Miller, a powerhouse investor, co-living operator, and the founder of Operation Rescue, Real Estate Mastery for Investors. Angel is active in 17 markets across the country and is known for helping us investors implement powerful operational frameworks that actually work. Angel, welcome to the show.
Well, Alex, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here today.
Absolutely. It's my pleasure. Honestly, you have a big story and I want to hear all. And for our listeners who don't know you, let's start from the beginning. How did your journey in real estate begin?
Let's see. I have always had a little bit of a real estate bug. Back in my younger days, really after I finished high school, I wanted to be an agent. And, that's the only thing I knew to do in real estate at that time. I didn't know anything about investing, anything like that. And I wanted to be an agent. But I went to college at the urging of my mother, got a business degree, got an IT degree, all those things. And I was just going to go out and set the world on fire, right? Come to find out, even as a junior manager, you don't make very much money when you don't have experience. So I ended up staying at the restaurant that I was working at the time and went into management there, which is great money, by the way. They pay a lot more than a junior manager in the corporate world. And I stayed there for a really long time. I loved what I did. I loved the hospitality arena. I ended up being a managing partner and spent about 10 years there. And after my third child, working 65 hours a week, I was like, okay, it's time to make a change, right? And unfortunately, it was right around the time, 2007, 2008, when the market was starting to crash again. I had, but recently before that, went back to real estate school because I still wanted to be an agent, went all the way, did the FBI check, and then boom, 2008 happened. So I ended up segueing again and went into mortgage loans. And at that time, there were still a lot of investment loans going on. I was doing B-type loans, balloons, things like that. And as it went a little further and it continued to dwindle, I had to segue again. At that time, the universities were still writing student loans with corporate banks. Sallie Mae, all those, nobody owned, the government didn't own student loans then. They didn't secure those. And they were still given by, all the big banks, US Bank, National Bank, Fidelity, all those things. And so it was an easy segue for me to move into student loans. Very much same underwriting premise. And so I ended up at the university, and instead of going into real estate, I decided to stay there. It was really exciting. I was learning a lot of things, really kind of being able for the first time to put much of the stuff that I learned in my business degree in IT into action. So I stayed at the university for over a decade as well. Went into senior leadership there, was able to learn a lot they pulled me into mergers and acquisitions where we were acquisitioning other universities and pulling them in to create new segues for the university. I was on the governance board. So I was just kind of all over the place and I loved it. I was learning so much. Project management was another key skill that I honed while I was in the university. And then COVID happened and I ended up losing my job at the university. So luckily that real estate bug never went away. And as things were slowing down, enrollment dropped, things like that, I'm kind of a busybody, so I have to be doing something all the time. I'd come across Cody Sperber in The Clever Investor, and I was like, I really like this guy's energy. I wasn't quite sure about wholesaling. I'd never heard of it, didn't know what it was, but I really liked his energy. And I'm like, I would love to see what this is about. So I ended up joining that mentorship and learning about wholesaling. So when I did lose my job at the university, it was an easy segue at that time. I'm like, I've been doing learning, kind of ingesting all this information through Clever Investor for about 6 months. And I'm just going to put it into action. It's time to put the rubber to the road, right? So I did that for a little bit. I started out, it was much harder than I thought it was going to be. I will say that. Wholesaling is a whole nother beast, but I finally got my first one. And as a newbie, you make all the mistakes. I had got my first deal under contract and posted it in our local RIA group. And I was super excited, couldn't wait. I just knew it was a great deal, right? And I was going to get a lot of calls and all the things. And those old school investors tore me up. Ouch. Tore me up. Said the deal was crap. Oh, it was bad. It was bad, but it was good because it was a great learning experience, but it was so bad. They just tore me up. So one investor who's really big in the area, he called me and he was like, I'd met him before at some of the RIA meetings and things. And he was like, Angel, well, let's walk through this. I want to know how you got to where you got on this deal. Took time with me to go through some teaching moments. And he was like, ignore those old school guys. That's how they are. They're going to tear you up, because everybody wants something for 60 cents on the dollar, right? And so he took me, through a great learning lesson of how I could have pivoted on the exit on those versus just trying to do, a typical wholesale deal. So it was really great. It was a terrible feeling at the time. I was so embarrassed reading those comments. I was so embarrassed, but it was a great learning experience. And so I kind of slowed down a little bit. I did end up closing that deal and I only made $1,000, but I did it. And I got that proof of concept. And that's really all I needed. A lot of people are that way. You need that proof of concept. And then you're just flying at that point because you understand it.
Wow, Angel, I like that you got your first experience. So tell us, how long did it take your first wholesale deal?
I was very lucky. It actually only took 45 days. So the 10th seller that I called jumped right on. It was a pre-foreclosure and he moved fast. I moved fast and it was like 45 days. So I got very lucky. Now, I want to say my second deal took a lot longer. And if I could tell new wholesalers anything, it's do not expect a fast conversion. I think it's very unnatural.
I like how you didn't get scared from the first negative feedback, but you found a mentor from your network in proximity and you got this experience. And listen, for 45 days, $1,000, it's not a bad deal. You didn't lose money. You still went through this deal and you got to the finish line. You got your experience. So tell us about your second deal.
So the second deal that I've got, now I do want you to know there were others in between there, but learning from my first experience and going through the process of really underwriting it better, things like that, there were many of them that just didn't pan out. But my second one was actually a 3-property portfolio. And I'd never done one of those, of course. I'm still fresh here, right? So this time I did the right thing. I walked the properties, took all the pictures, tried to negotiate with the seller the best that I could where I thought it needed to be, but let the seller know at that time I needed to go and run the numbers, and then I would come back to him with an offer. And this time I called up my mentor and said, hey, let's walk through this together because, this could be a really good one. And it was. It ended up being the first big one that I had that was like $55,000 fee. So it worked out great. But had I did it on my own, I probably would have got tore up again. I'm going to be real honest at that point because you can YouTube University all the time. But when you're in the thick of things, it doesn't give you all the details. Only those true paid mentorships may walk you through step by step. That YouTube University, it doesn't give you all the information that you need. So it's very important, and I tell people this all the time, especially starting out, find a mentor. You don't have to pay for a coach. You don't have to do those things. Find somebody like I did in your local network. Go to your local RIA. Find out where the investors are hanging out. Go to lunch with them. Make friends because people love to share their knowledge. It's human nature. You don't always have to pay for that knowledge. And I did the right thing. If looking back, I totally did the right thing. That's what I did. I went to those RIA meetings and I made those connections. So when I did have something that fell into my hands that I knew could be profitable, I would engage with those people and say, I need a little help. Can you help me with this? Can you help me to understand how, work in a portfolio is different than working a single family residence in foreclosure? That was the only really prior knowledge that I had to put into it. And it was a much different underwriting process, much different marketing process. So I encourage people, that's how you get from one deal to the next, is engaging with people who can get you to the next step. Look for those people that are doing what it is you want to do and start to build that relationship, because there's a lot of free mentorship out there. Like I said, it's human nature. We love to share our knowledge. and use that, leverage that to get you to your next steps.
Mentorship is one thing, right? You contribute and you bring value, giving back to community. Some people do it out of kindness of the heart, but in your case, it was also a partnership. So you brought also some value to this partner. You shared that revenue, whatever you could have guys generated, and he helped you to understand, to get through the learning curve, and he got you to the finish line, which is the most important thing. You can make either no money, nothing, or you can be part of some revenue, right?
Right.
This is important. But Angel, let's go to the basics. I know we jumped right through the one deal, second deal. What is wholesaling? I know some of the people listen to us and like, we don't know what they're talking about. So can you please share with us?
Yeah, so wholesaling is when you as a wholesaler or a signor do the negotiation with the seller, come to an agreed upon price and terms, put a contract with the seller, yourself and the seller, and then you take your interest in the property, in the contract, I should say, and you assign that to someone who's actually going to buy it. Okay. And what you get it's at this point, once you have, and this is the TC that's going to come out in me a little bit. When you're wholesaling, you actually have two different contracts. So you have an AB contract, which is between you and the wholesaler or assignor. And then you have a BC contract that is now the assignor assigning his interest to an end buyer. And that assignor collects an assignment fee for connecting the seller and the buyer. So you as an assigner or a wholesaler are never taking deed to a property. You're just assigning your interest in that contract with the seller to the person who will.
Right. I like how you detailed, because you were organization of this, right? You knew how to coordinate those deals, and at some point of your life you were coordinator, and you still are, from what I understand. But from what I know also, and correct me if I'm wrong, so basically guys, it's a middleman. So wholesaler is a middleman. He finds a property. He's a bird dog. He finances properties. He negotiates the deal. He get it on the contract and say, listen, I'm going to buy your property, Mr. Seller, for $100,000. And then he go back to the market. He knows this property could be a little bit more, but he's doing so much work around it that he want to get paid. Naturally, everyone wants to get paid. And he knows a few out there, a few flippers or a few end buyers that would like to have this house and they ready to pay a little more premium. So they found a buyer for this property for, let's say, 120,000. And they say, okay, listen, I have this property and I can sell it for 120,000. So on a closing, they reassign and they get this fee of 20,000 on the assignment fee. But it's not the only one way how to close those deals, right, Angel? What are the other ways? There's another way, meaning double close. Can you explain us what it means?
Yes. So similar to the wholesale situation where you have an AB and a BC contract, that still exists. And that's called, when you do a double close, that's called the first leg of the close. You're still having the exact same steps that you're doing in your regular assignment situation. However, the end buyer, which is usually the wholesaler on the first leg, is now going to sell that to the end buyer in the second leg of the transaction. Okay. And what happens is, either for the first closing, that wholesaler is going to bring in some transactional funding to close that, and then use the money from the second leg, where the end buyers bring in their money to actually purchase the property. That covers the transactional lending from the first leg of the transaction. So that's generally what a double close is. And you do that as a wholesaler, you're doing that so that the seller doesn't know how much money you're making from the end buyer. And that's the general reason why people want to do a double close, because they don't want the seller to know how much they're making on that assignment, basically. But some people just, they just choose to do that. Oftentimes, I never had to do that. I was always very open with my sellers that, I'm basically finding your end buyer, and I'm going to take basically a marketing fee for finding your buyer for you. That's the way I always approached it. But many wholesalers don't like to have that conversation, and that's okay if that's your business model, and they utilize the double close so that the seller doesn't know how much they're making in the wholesale fee. Now, it's definitely recommended to do if you've really done a great job negotiating with the seller and you're making a very large spread on it. Because then the seller will come back with, well, I could have got $50,000 more out of this deal if they really knew how much you were making. So privacy is a big piece of doing a double close.
So it's a risk that you're running, right? The seller can back off on the closing day and say, listen, why do I leave so much money on the table? And it's not really fair.
Yes, absolutely. And the other side of that is, if you're using transactional lending and there are some title companies and attorneys that won't do a double close per se. They'll close one day and then close the second leg the next day. Well, if you've brought transactional lending funds into that first leg and then something blows up the second day, your lender is screwed, for a better lack of a better word. So there's a real risk there. So double closes can get sticky.
And what I want to ask you, right? You already kind of answered this question, but let's dig a little deeper. How do you close double close? Where do you get money? So can you explain what is transactional funding is?
Yes. So there are lenders out there who will lend X amount of dollars to close the first transaction. So if you have a contract going on to close that first leg, you need $100,000, and that's going to take care of the purchase price and the closing costs. You've got it set up so the second leg is $120,000, inclusive of closing costs. So you're looking to earn, just so everybody understands, a $20,000 difference between the first close and the second close. So normally, someone doesn't have their own cash to bring to the table, so they reach out and they pay a transactional lender a small percentage to bring the funds in to cover that first closing. So that transactional lender is going to lend them $100,000 plus a fee to close the first transaction. Then the second transaction, where they're now selling 120 to another end buyer, that end buyer is bringing 120,000 plus closing costs to the table, and the funding from that, the proceeds from that sale, are now going back to the first leg to send back to the transactional lender. So that transactional lender inevitably is just lending the funds basically on a 24-hour basis. They're going to put money in and get money back all in the same day for a fee. And that's the only cost to the wholesaler, is a small transactional fee.
And what is the amount of this fee usually?
Generally 1% to 2%.
1% to 2% within 24 hours. Not a bad deal, right? For transactional funder, but they take a lot of risk that
Yes.
it can close or it can be delayed. That's what happened. But in a nutshell, why do we need this transactional funding? Because there's paying this amount of money and the other seller wants this amount of money. Why can't we just transfer funds from one to another? Because you have to settle each contract and its position that it's there. You can't just wait between those contracts to be settled. The first one is to settle with the seller, and then second one is to settle with the buyer. So that's why it's a little more complicated with double close, because you have to get this additional funding in between. But you can get a little more in the end. Or if you don't want to have this difficult conversation with a seller, you can still double close. And everyone has their own weakness or their own strengths. Nothing wrong with it. It's just the way how people do business.
Unfortunately, there are many title companies or attorneys that, their underwriting process and fiduciary duties don't allow them to do double closes. They literally have to close all funds out each close of business day. So, you're also sometimes posed with the challenge of also finding someone who will facilitate that double close. So to me, it was always just easier to tell the seller up front what I was doing. And you're not,
right.
You avoid paying the double fees, because you're still going to pay fees on both closings. So now you're paying double fees too.
Right. And how do you find those title companies that we can work with wholesalers?
Yeah, I mean, really, it's just a matter of picking up the phone and having the conversation, walking that title agent through what transactional funding is, how it works. Because one of the things that, in my experience, because, I have a huge network, I do TC nationwide, and we've built a great network of people that we know do it. But in searching and sourcing those people out, a stopping point in discussion with these title agents was not funding the first close until the money from the second close came in. And that's imperative to secure the lender. Right. So say if they go ahead and fund that first leg, seller's out. He's got his money, he's out. And now the buyer on the second leg drops off, ghost. Nobody can find him. What happens to that transactional lender's funding? That wholesaler had probably made a personal guarantee and is now on the hook for it. Right. So it's, as you reach out and you discuss this with a title agent, that has to be like the pinnacle part of the process is you do not fund leg one until money from leg two comes in to make sure that lender's funding is secure.
Wow. I think that was a very important piece of information, guys. If someone wants to try wholesaling, make sure you find the right title company that actually can facilitate such a deal in a pace that will be secure for you in the first place, because you don't want to get on a hook of 100,000 and then be hectic finding another buyer for your deal, or even stuck with the property, right? And what happened if you said the personal guarantee? So what in this case, technically, this lender can go after you because it's a note for one day? What kind of note is that?
Yeah. So whenever I handle transactional lending deals, there's usually, of course, a contract, but there's also the promissory note and the personal guarantee that says, hey, if anything does go sideways, that they're personally responsible and they can enforce the contract and the promissory note legally. So they could technically take that person to court and try to get back whatever funds were lent out.
And how do you find those transactional lenders?
My goodness, they're everywhere now. It used to be a little harder to source them, but get into any of the creative groups, any of the creative Facebook groups. There are tons of lenders, but you need to vet them just like you vet anybody else in the business. Make sure that they are doing what they say they can do. They have processes in place. Make sure, and this is where I always just encourage a TC. Oftentimes on cash deals, a lot of people just don't use TCs because you don't feel it's necessary. But once you start to pull in different components into a cash deal, like transactional funding, you really need to take it to somebody who's handling that. Myself as a TC, I know the right questions to ask. I mean, I'm going to give you an example. I had one come in a couple of weeks ago, and it was all over the place. The AB contract didn't have the right people on it. The BC contract, the end buyer wasn't even, it was a defunct LLC that really technically couldn't purchase anything because it's defunct. It was just a great, huge mess. The title company had no idea what transactional funding was. So, I had to go through that conversation to see if they could even properly facilitate it. So there's just a lot of things. And had that just wholesaler taken it and ran with it with a transactional lender who maybe it was their first time lending funds. They didn't understand all the paperwork that needed to be in place, all those things. That could have been a really messy deal. So I encourage you, anytime you're going outside of a cash transaction and you're bringing in additional components, reach out to a TC. Or if you have a very strong relationship with a title agent or attorney, make sure that you're having that conversation so they do know how to properly facilitate the deal and can make sure the appropriate paperwork's in place so everybody's secure.
And for our listeners, TC, guys, is transactional coordinator. And you work as an independent contractor. You don't work for title company, right? You help basically investor to get to the finish line on those deals. So you work directly, you middleman between this investor, the wholesaler, and the title company. You help them to go through this process, right?
Correct. Yes. And my client can be the seller, it can be the buyer, it can be the wholesaler. So yes, we do work independently and we ensure that all parties are secure. All documentation to secure, whether it's the seller, the buyer, the wholesaler, all of those things are in place. And we are the ones who drive the communication throughout the process, which is probably one of the things that trip up deals or kill deals all the time, is the lack of communication on things. So that's one thing your TC really brings value in that area, is because they're communicating with all parties, not just one here or there, and nobody's on the same page. They keep everybody on the same page in a complete understanding of what's next steps and what it's going to take to get it to the finish line.
And what states do you operate?
All 50.
All 50. Wow. Mm-hmm. And how long have you been doing this?
3 years.
Oh.
Yeah.
Done any possible deals out there probably at this point?
Yeah, you think you've saw them all, but I'm going to be real honest, Alex. There's no two deals that are the same. There are so many different types of deals, and you have cash deals, but when you get into creative, you can get really creative. It may be a subject to deal. It may be a subject to with a seller carry. You may just have seller financing. It may be an executory contract, or, people call it a Morby method, which is, way more complex than most deals are. And some people even say they're illegal, well, kind of like subject to. A lot of people think those are illegal too. But, yeah, as a TC, especially a creative TC, you definitely get exposed to the most creative of deals out there. So that's really been a benefit to me as an investor, understanding all that paperwork and the intricacies. As my business partner, Chris James, and I, as we started to forge further into like co-living and things like that, it kind of unleashed so many creative options when you're structuring these deals. And a lot of that, came from the learning that I've done with other people's deals being a TC over the years.
I like how we're establishing all the terminologies from the start before we're going back to your journey. So right away, I'm going to ask you, what is sub to and what is Morby method? So can you a little describe those two things and why it's different?
Goodness. So subject to is when a buyer takes title to a property, but the mortgage stays in the seller's name. Okay. So the buyer becomes responsible for making that monthly payment, but until it's paid off or refinanced, note always stays in the seller's name. So they do get title to the property, but the note stays in the seller's name. That's taking that's taking something over subject to.
Taking over the mortgage.
Correct.
But with the seller's name on that mortgage. So you kind of taking over the payments for that mortgage to be technical. Perfect.
Yes. But you do get the deed to the property.
Right. And the second one, what is the difference between that and Morby method? What is Morby method?
Morby method is much, much more complex. So we could do just a show on Morby method. However, in a nutshell, quickly, it's basically where you're going to bring in some type of lending, whether it's like a DSCR loan, some loan product in to cover a large portion of the transaction. And then the seller is going to carry another additional amount over and above what the purchase price is, so that the person who is doing it will actually get money back at the close because of the seller carry portion.
It's a lot of technicality here because the property has to appraise now. It's not existent, the brokerage. And while we touch on Morby method, it begs the question, what is seller financing? Tell us about seller financing too.
Seller financing is just when the owner owns the property free and clear. So there's no debt service on it at all. They owe $0 and they're willing to be the bank for you and lend the purchase price to you and carry the note as the lender themselves.
Right now we have a creative financing masterclass. So basically, folks, you have many options to close. So if you don't have money, there's a way even to walk out from the deal. Actually, today I looked for the property in West Palm Beach and someone posted Morby method. And the same deal, it was 75 DSCR and it was 25% seller financing deal on the back end. But also seller will give back some money, 10% to the seller. So basically you buy this property, you have to get the loan on the dock, but in the end of the day, you got to walk out with some cash in your pocket. And it gets much more complicated. It gets much more requirements, the timelines moving along. But it's all about taking action and trying those in and learning about it on the way. It's all possible. People doing it day and night. And Angel is a great example of how to master those. And if you don't know those, your TC, transactional coordinator, will walk you through this process because it is possible. People doing it every day. Okay, perfect. Now we established some base terminology. I like how it is. Let's go back to your journey. Deal number 2. At what stage did you decide, hey, I want to get in my portfolio up and I want to start accumulating properties as well?
Okay, so I am a bit of a stubborn girl. Actually, really enjoyed wholesaling at the beginning. And unfortunately, I had really just started to gain some traction. My mother was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer and everything really just went on the back burner. It just became about her at that point and making sure
priorities shifted and you have to focus on your family and immediate.
Well, so at that point, it was just, I had done wholesaling for a while. I'd built up a really great business, made great money. There's nothing I can say bad about wholesaling other than I just didn't like it. It was a grind, and I truly was working 14 hours a day. Sellers, you have to be at their beck and call. You've got to take the calls when the calls come in. You've got to, spend a lot of time back and forth with the negotiations. It was just very time consuming. And, after things, you just come to a point where this is not why I got into real estate. I got into real estate to own things, to earn that passive income. I really wanted to scale. And even with wholesaling, you can scale the business, but only so far. You've got to have other things to do. You've got to have other avenues of income. And I went to, and like I said, I'm no spring chicken here. I had taken my retirement funds from the university and put them into my wholesale business. And like I said, it was great and I did fine. But now, I've got to look at another way to earn faster, right? And now I'm less years of retirement income. I've got to earn faster and I want to have the opportunity to do other things. Real estate for me is just an opportunity to fund the things that I'm really passionate about. So although I love real estate, well, and I'm going to even be more specific here, I love co-living. That's just something I've really gravitated to. But I wanted to be the opportunity for me to do other passion projects. And you can't do that with wholesaling. It's hit or miss. It's active income. It's not income. So that's kind of where the segue came into owning properties.
Yeah, I like it. You start thinking what else there, because either you have W-2 job, you have to work for your paycheck. If you start doing wholesaling, if you stop picking up your phone, your money flow stops as well. It doesn't matter how good you are at this. You're still the main driver. You can train a couple of VAs to do this, and you can hire someone, get a partner, but still you probably was the main producers there, because of the amount of knowledge, you can just copy and paste it to someone else's head. And the way how you talk and how to convince seller, it's a skill that you have to build over time, and with bad experience also getting a good experience. But now you need to look, how can I get a little more passive on this front? And while operating and buying and selling real estate left and right, it was right in front of you all this time, right? So what was your first deal? Did you, instead of wholesaling the deal, did you got a good deal and you just kept it? How did you go?
Yeah. Well, it was definitely a little bit of a process. As I said before, the mentorship that I went through with Cody Sparber, it was about wholesaling. It wasn't about buying and holding. So at that point, when you make that decision to make that move, what do you got to do? You got to be resourceful. Like, who's out there doing what I want to be doing? And I actually ended up coming across Pace Morby at that time, and the creative side of it blew my mind. I'm like, oh yeah, I've got to learn more about this, because now I'm in a position where I don't have retirement funds. I don't have that 401k to go just invest into something. I'm financially limited, and I have this man telling me that I can go do this with no money out of my pocket. Is it too good to be true? Is this all BS? Right? So I really just jumped in there and started, trying to learn about it. And I ended up coming across, he did a multifamily challenge. And I jumped into that challenge because I'm like, more doors, more money, right? I'm just going to jump right into multifamily. And I ended up getting on a team with a couple of his leaders in the group. And one of them happened to be my current business partner, Chris James. And from there, it's kind of history, but I basically just came humble and was like, Chris actually owns the TC company that I operate. And he had said that at some point on one of our Zooms that they were looking for a TC. And I'm like, well, I never did it before, but I know I'm capable, right? Yeah, I'm a smart girl. I pick up quick. I'm very capable. So I interviewed with him, and he said this really funny. One of the reasons that he hired me, one of the questions that he asked is, where do you see yourself in a couple of years? And I was like, not as a TC, which I'm interviewing for a TC job, right? But I wanted him to know I'm doing this as a learning experience. This is very interesting to me, but I'm using it as a resource. This is not where I want to be I don't want to be a TC in 2 years. I want to be much more than a TC in 2 years. And needless to say, he hired me, and the rest is history. But, now I operate that business, and he and I own several other businesses together. And my first acquisition, I was not his real estate business partner at that time. And I was still, for money, still wholesaling. And I found a really great deal. And when I did, I went to him and I pitched it to him, and I'm like, I have no money. I don't have anything to give here. But I did negotiate a hell of a deal, and I think it would fit for you. And I don't want a wholesale fee. I want to own it. How can we make this work? So that was my first one. He gave me a percentage of ownership for bringing the deal to the table. And then from there, we ended up being partners and all the things. And now we're over 100 and something doors. But that's how it started. I had nothing to give other than my knowledge and my skill to be able to close a deal. And I took it to him and just said, hey, I don't want a wholesale fee. I want to own. And
but you negotiated the deal. That's one of the biggest. Finding the deal and negotiate the deal. It's such a big piece of this sin, because it takes sometimes months to find the right deal that pencil out and actually have a lot of meat on the bone for everyone. And I just want to reiterate for our listeners, repeat it again, that it's not only about money, right? It's about experience, and it's about your skill sets that you bring to the table. And everything is negotiable in this space. And for your partner in this deal, your mentor, he still made some money. You brought the deal. It made sense because he was walking out with this cash flow and asset, and it was a really good deal for him. And instead of giving you wholesale fee 20, 30, 50,000, he just cut you in the deal. It's even made it better for him. It's limited his exposure to the deal. And now he has you. and learning about this process, and maybe you'll bring him more deals. So
Well,
you bring in nurturing this relationship, and in the end of the day, it did, right?
well,
This is how it played out.
it's really funny because when I first went into that deal, I went in at 6% equity. Now, when I say that, I watch for people's facial expressions when I say that, because most people are like, 6%. Okay. We're talking a few years later. I still own that property with Chris. Well, now I get 50% because I'm a partner. And do you know how much we actually net off of that property, that one property every month? Around $5,500.
Okay, how many units is there? Is it single family,
No, it's a
multifamily?
co-living. It's a co-living. We turned it, use PadSplit. We turned it into a PadSplit, and it nets us $5,500 a month. 7 unit.
Wow.
I really try to have people wrap that around their head. If you're just starting out, if you have the skill to speak to a seller and negotiate a great deal, and then you take that to a true end buyer who's ready to close on that, and they tell you that they'll give you 5, 7, 9, 10% equity in it for bringing the deal to the table. To me, that's absolutely crazy. I mean, now we're hundreds of doors later, but I went in at 6%. And now the same one is still in our portfolio. And now I get 50%, and we're earning $5,500 a month off that one asset. And it costs me nothing but a conversation and a negotiation with the seller.
When did you buy this property? What year was it?
2023. No,
2 years in the property, and you cash flowing really well. After all these expenses, you still bring good money and good income. You making much more that you would have get in wholesale fee. Let's put it this way. Now
Yeah.
you also went creative, right? You went a
Yeah.
step and beyond. Then you went through co-living experience, which is most people even don't know what it is. So I'm gonna ask you this question, Angel. What is co-living?
Co-living is when you take a normal single family residence that you would rent to one unit, one family, right? And then you take it and you optimize any common areas. So generally you're converting maybe living room, dining room, dens, things like that into extra spaces. And what you end up doing is renting each one of those spaces individually. So say you end up with seven rooms in a home, you're now renting to an individual tenant in each room. So you've basically taken what, and this applies in a couple ways, and I want to kind of share that, but you've got 7 sources of income coming in versus one. The real upside of that is when that one family moves out and you don't occupy the property immediately, you may go a month, 2 months, 3 months without any income, versus now you've got 7 people in that house. If one person leaves, you barely fill it, because immediately within 30 days, generally it's rented again. And it's the more community that you can create within each one of these houses, the longer those people are staying. Just back to the same unit that I was talking about, that was my first one in, we have people that have been there since we started it. 80% of the people that are in that, they have been there since the beginning. We have a couple of rooms where people go in and out. That's it. So we've had that steady income. And when those couple of rooms that go in and out, we barely fill those. We barely fill them because we have 5 other people that have been consistent in occupancy for over a year.
Was it the original plan? How you underwrote the deal originally? Did you plan it to have it long-term one tenant or right away co-living?
No, we right away had went co-living. I was actually, like I said, I mean, I was privy to these conversations at the time. I was not Chris's, business partner per se in the real estate, but I was in the conversations because I was still the TC who was doing all their deals, right? I was still taking care of all the paperwork and in those conversations. And co-living had just kind of really started to spring up. People were just really kind of starting to talk about it. PadSplit, that's the business model we use, but people were really just starting to get excited about that. And it's just something that kind of, kind of ignited something in me. I'm like, man, this is sounding phenomenal, and I'm a real kind of number and papers person. So after penciling a couple of these out, like, geez, you could really make 3 times the income on it. I went into that looking for that specific property for that reason. And that's what was pitched to them was, let's use PadSplit and get this going.
How did you know it's going to work in that area? Is there any market drivers that you look, hospitals or university, or it doesn't matter where it's located as long as there's bedroom count?
Yes, there's a lot of lot of things that you have to look at. One of the reasons, and I'm going to plug PadSplit here just because they're so phenomenal. But one of the great things about using them is they do a ton of R&D. Okay, so they're spending millions of dollars on R&D. They provide all the data in the area for these things, all the market data, the pricing, the occupancy rates based on, PadSplits in the area. So it's super simple when you're using PadSplit to go in, and I'm going to say, zip code 12345, I'm going to plug that in there, and it's going to give me all the surrounding zip codes, every unit in that area, what that unit is renting for, what the occupancy rates are, how long it takes to get from live to 80% booked, whether it's 20 days, whether it's 45 days. So they're already providing all of that data. And it's fantastic. So it's easy to go in and underwrite based on the data that's fully available to you. And it's actual data. It's their data. So they really can you can't lie and say you're making $5,000 a month, because PadSplit checks that. They know what you're making. They know when you've got a room that's occupied or not occupied. That is legitimate data that we're able to pull from, that we know it's 100% correct.
So what kind of data does it provide? They provide you rental rates per room. They give you occupancy status in the area. Can you share a little more into this details?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So yes, they give you the rental data. And like I said, it's not just where you are, it's anything surrounding you too. So it's going to tell you how many units are in the area, what each unit individually is renting for, whether it's, X amount of dollars with a shared bath, whether it's X amount of dollars with a private bath, if you've got a private entrance. It's going to give you occupancy rates. So say the average in zip code 12345 is 80% versus 12346, which is 20%. So you can actually see where occupancy rates are higher and lower. It will tell you how long it's going to take in general in that zip code to get you from 0 at live to 80% occupied, whether, like I said, it's 15 days, 20 days, 30 days. So you really have a lot of data before you even go into these things to utilize in your underwriting, because that's a whole nother subject, but your underwriting is the most important thing you do. Everything has to pencil out. Everything has to be accounted for, or you're going to run into problems later on. And PadSplit provides that data that you really need to really hone in on these things.
I love it. We will provide the link in the description for our listeners. So guys, try it and check it out. And I think it's very exciting. Wow. So you went right for the first deal. You went double creative. You went co-living and you went creative financing. So tell us a little more on those co-living. Do you have annual leases with each tenants on those bedrooms, or is it kind of month-to-month situation?
No, actually, because like I said, we use PadSplit in our business model. They actually do all the upfront work and do, all the contracts, all the collection of fees. They do the background checks, credit checks, all that stuff. But they are considered short term, so 30 days or more. Now, PadSplit also has an option for them to commit to 12 weeks, or they pay a $175 fee if they don't commit. So it's really incentivizes that at least a minimum of a 12-week stay. And most people do that. I mean, I'd probably venture to say 90% or more people do that.
Love it. So you hedging over risks through PadSplit and through their systems. Now they underwrite and they give you a little more data, and they give you not only data, but they give you a lot of documentation, and they background check and screening on the tenants before they coming to knock into your door. Wow, I love it. It's very interesting. Let's move on to the next stage. I know you've done a lot of different creative since after that. What was your next deal, and how did it grow to what you are right now, 100-something units?
Well, I'm not just going to say the next one, because all of them, Alex, 95% of everything we acquired is creative. So we either took it subject to on a hybrid, which is like subject to and seller carry, or seller finance. So we buy everything creatively, and that's what has kind of allowed us to scale, because I want to point out an important fact is a lot of people bring in, say, a DSCR loan, for example, and rates of 8 to 10%, depending on what that looks like. We're taking these over subject to at 2.875.
Can beat that.
Yeah, PITI, right. And oftentimes we won't do anything less than a 7-year balloon, but oftentimes we don't even have to balloon them. Sellers are on board for the remainder 24 years. So we have kind of built our business model as pulling it in creatively, whether that's subject to or a hybrid situation. And then we use private money lenders to take care of the gap for the renovation, holding cost, closing cost, all the things.
It's a multi-level operation. I understand it. But how do you take care of your investors? So if, for example, you take a sub to property and you have an investor to take care of renovation. So basically the income generated from the property, you first paying off your investor before you take in any profits, or do you plan some refinancing down the road? I don't see you refinancing 2.5% rate, right?
Refinance, but we've had the first one that we did that was like they came up for maturity. The obvious answer was, we'll refinance. Well, oddly enough, that particular lender was like, oh my gosh, you are making, $5,000 a month net off of this. Why don't I take that $100,000 and buy in? So now let me be a 25% equity partner versus a private money lender. So we found now that that's generally what they want to do. Once they actually see it, now they've been with us for a year and they're seeing the return on investment. A lot of private money lenders do want to be owners. They just don't know how. They only know what they know, right? And converting them to equity partners at the end when they're at maturity has been very beneficial. It allows them the opportunity to have ownership, but not have to operate, because that's a sore point for most people. They don't understand how to operate, but they want that cash flow. So it's been a natural segue to do that. And so we actually haven't been forced to refinance anything at this point. So we still have intact all of our assets on their original terms, whether it was subject to or seller finance.
Love it. Angel, I have to ask you those questions. How do you hedge yourself over risk of the bank foreclosing or finding out the seller changed, buyer, whatever owner of the property has changed? How do you hedge over this risk?
I mean, anytime that you're doing subject to, there's an inherent risk of the due on sale being called. That's part of the business. Either you have the risk tolerance for it or you don't. I'm just going to say that first and foremost, because you can't eliminate it. The risk is always there. However, you can mitigate it. And we have had due on sale called. And what we have found is generally the lender's not in the business of holding assets. They're in the business of collecting interest. That's their business model, and that's really what they choose to stick to. So they generally give you an amount of time to figure out what you want to do. Now, I say this with a grain of salt, but just in my experience, if you are a good buyer and you're making those payments on time, they really don't have any reason to want to call that note due, right? Because they have an active loan that's being taken care of, and that's what they're in the business to do. Now, you may have to find some other solutions. Every lender is different. What Wells Fargo does versus what mom and pop credit union does are two different things. And say, if the mom and pop credit union is like, oh no, you can't do that, that's absolutely allowed, then there are ways to go around it. Now I don't want to go through all the options, but worst case scenario, you deed the property back to the owner and you do an executory contract with a balloon later. You can do that. There are several ways to mitigate due on sale if it is called.
So you can reverse the transaction back to seller so they don't have any other due on sale. So for our listeners, due on sale clause, meaning if they notice that the house was sold and they saying, okay, there's an actual note agreement between the original owner and the lender, which saying if there's a sale of this, they have to be taken care of first. They have to be paid first, regardless of what kind of sale it is. So if they notice that there was a transaction of changing the hands of the ownership of the property, they may call out and they send notice to the existing owner on the paper and say, listen, we didn't loan to you. We have this contract with the previous owner and you owe us whatever balance is, 200, 500,000 on this floor, and within 24 hours. Usually they give months, right? Or how long is it?
Oh, yeah. I mean, the one we had, it was almost a year.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's not immediate. It's not immediate.
So how did you handle that particular situation? Did you have to go back to the seller and try to figure out the way to go around it?
Well, we got really lucky. We've had it called a couple of times. It's not just once that has happened. It's happened several times. But in one instance, the seller passed and we weren't aware. The family at some point reached out to the lender. They finally, I guess, found some paperwork, reached out to the lender and like, oh no, my dad passed like 6 months ago, So the bank looked it up and of course, at that point realized that the deed had been transferred to the company. And so they just reached out and they were like, well, you guys have been paying. The kids don't want the property. let's just keep it going. And we still pay it to this day. So,
Wow.
yeah. And then we've had another one.
Did you have to become a guarantor on this loan? Did you have to supply?
Nothing has changed. No new paperwork was done. They said, you guys keep paying
Wow.
on time. If it comes to a point where we don't pay, then they'll call it. But they don't want the asset back. And like I said, they've got a beautifully performing loan on their docket. They don't want to mess that up. And that was a larger bank. I won't say which one, but that is a larger bank. And that's why I said there's some difference between, say, a Wells Fargo and mom and pop credit union. If I can leave you guys with anything, it's just that it's not the big scary beast that everybody thinks it is. There's always room to negotiate, like any other asset of what we do, right? So don't be scared by that. It can happen. The best advice I can give is if you are super low risk tolerant, don't do it. Find other ways. Don't do subject to, because there is no guarantee it won't be called. But just know that there are definitely ways to mitigate it if it happens. And your TCs, just to throw that out there, reach out to a TC. Most TCs work to mitigate due on sale clauses.
Yes, and there is also the ways how you can work around it. I heard people creating a trust. Yep. So trust won't be anonymous, so it's not gonna trigger the clause. They're not gonna get any notice as long as insurance is in there. There's tricks, but TC, professional TC would know and guide you through the process. That's why it's important to have a proper TC on your team. So what kind of scale of the properties did you buy through those creative financing? Is it specifically residential, 1 to 4 units, or did you go bigger, multifamily?
For the co-living so far, they've all 90% have been just single family residences that we convert. I mean, we have some that go up to 15 rooms, larger, like bi-level, tri-level kind of things. But we do have one small commercial multifamily that we're converting. But for the most part, there's like a sweet spot. And this kind of ties into the underwriting of it, though. There's really a sweet spot, because once your PITI gets too high, it kind of offsets things. And then the way that we do it, and this is just personal, like if you want to bring in a DSCR loan and do it that way, it can work a little differently. But for our business model, where we are taking over the existing mortgage subject to, and then bringing in a private lender to kind of cover the gap, there's kind of a sweet spot there, because at some point, does it make sense to bring in $200,000 in private money when the asset's only worth $300,000? Or, so that you've got to really understand the underwriting of that. But I would love, and we are kind of working on that now, just throwing it out there, we are looking at some boutique hotels that we are going to convert to co-living. So that's kind of the next step. Because like I said, we've done up to about 15 rooms now. I want to see it on a scale. So that's the next step.
I love it. You got already a little teaser of your future plans, what you're working on, and I'm excited about it. We want to hear more about it next time. But so tell us a little bit more your company and how you work with investors. So it calls Operations Rescue, right? Tell us a little bit more about your operations there.
Okay, so Operations Rescue was kind of born from, Chris and I also run a mentorship. And in July, we had a big mastermind in Vegas, and it was absolutely phenomenal. And I'm really not being biased here. It was for proof of concept for us. It was totally different than any other mastermind you went to. We thoughtfully and intentionally created things during this mastermind that we knew were going to change people's lives. And it did. And it was so phenomenal. So after that, a couple months after we had the mastermind, Chris and I were like, we're going to get on a call with each and every person that attended this. And we're going to say, what did you take away? What did you put into action? Because we gave them very actionable steps, walked them through 90-day plans, all the things. And we wanted to follow up and see who put it into action. And if you were having bottlenecks, what were those bottlenecks? So we took time to Zoom with each and every member that had attended. And what we found after, talking to 40, 50 people, were all their bottlenecks were operational. They were doing great. They were getting out there, taking action. They had their mindset right. They were taking the appropriate steps, but you only know what you know, right? And at some point, if you are taking action and you are growing your business, you're going to hit a bottleneck. Something you just don't understand throws you for a loop, right? And what we found was that was it. That was their stopping point. And that's kind of how Operations Rescue was born, because we wanted to be able to give people a platform where they could just come in and be like, hey, Chris, hey, Angel, this is what I got going on in my business. What's your thoughts? Because people pay a lot for coaching and all those things, but sometimes you just need to get on the damn phone and have a question. Can you just answer my question? I've got all these other 15 things I need to be doing down pat, but this is tripping me up and I need an answer. And we wish we would have had that, when we started out, because if you are an action taker and, you make it a purpose to incorporate learning in what you're doing every day so that you're continuously growing, you're doing all the right things, but there are going to be just some things that are just like, dang it, I don't understand this, or I don't know this. We wanted to give them a platform where they could just come on and be like, hey, this is what's up. Help me out. I don't know where to go from here. Or I screwed this up. How do I fix it? And that's how Operations Rescue was born. We wanted to genuinely just help people when they had a bottleneck, because that was not available anywhere else.
And specifically with coaching, right? Usually they kind of have one theme they're going through the course and you learn about it. So they're very limited in their exposure, and usually it's for beginners. So going to the next stage is much harder. But actually question starts when you start doing this stuff.
Yes.
And actual problems happens not from the beginning, but actually during the process. Especially this market, you have to be creative to actually do some deals and make some things happen. Wow. I love it, Angel. Thank you so much for sharing all of the stuff. Now I have a few questions for you. First one, you kind of give us a glance for your future. Can you a little more about where you head in your business building and real estate acquisitions? Where you look in the future?
Yeah, so we will definitely continue down the road of co-living. Like I said, it has been, everybody has that one thing that really kind of resonates with them. You're just excited about it. That's that one thing that when I roll out of bed every day, I'm like, what can I do today? What can I learn? How can I help somebody who's trying to do what I'm doing? It gives me a lot of purpose and I have a lot of passion for it. So co-living is totally in my future. Now, with that said, I would like to grow that in an exponential way over the next year. And I think that's going to be through some more of that multi-family acquisitioning and really scaling that co-living model on a bigger level. So that is definitely where we're heading over the next year. We also, of course, want to grow the mentorship. We're very passionate about that. We've got like a small intimate group now, and we like it that way. We had, just to give you a little background, we had actually launched the mentorship 2024. We had the mastermind in July of 2024. In that short amount of time, those 50 people had already purchased their first co-living. They were on their second, their third. What we didn't plan for, Alex, was people to really do that, like really take action, major action in the way they did. And so what we do, we're like, shoot, we kind of built this mentorship, like you said, for that beginner person that's just jumping in there. We had no idea they were going to excel the way that they did. We actually had to stop the mentorship, revamp it so that we can now be functional for people who are just starting out or people who are experienced. We could offer truly what both sets of people needed, because we were so unprepared for our people to just blow up like they did. And it was fantastic to see. So, for us, it's growing that kind of the second leg of the mentorship, where we want to be different. We want to be that true hand for somebody, because even those people now who they've maybe purchased their first PadSplit or their second one, they're running into these problems operationally still, and we're there for them. That's the value we bring to them. Is Chris and I have our processes. They're totally streamlined. We have SOPs for everything. Our property management knows exactly what the expectation is, the extra things that need to be done. We've mapped that out. So we can, if somebody hops on and they're like, hey, I've got this issue, at my house, they got this going on, not sure how to kind of streamline that. We're like, oh, got it. Here we go. And that's the value we can bring to our people. So, we'd like to see that grow. We don't want to grow. Honestly, you don't want to grow too much, because we do like the intimacy of it. And, it's not about the money. It's a relatively cheap mentorship. We only charge $97 a month, and that's more of running systems. And, you've got to pay your integrator and all of those things. The value for us is they now bring deals to us too, and they want to partner, right? So that also grows our portfolio. And so we're building great relationships. We're doing what we love. We're passionate about mentoring, and we get the opportunity every day to do that. But we also have the opportunity to grow our portfolio through our students who are bringing us those deals, and we're teaching them how to operate those efficiently.
I love it. You actually teaching people and enabling them, and you have a real product. You teaching people how to get this fish instead of buying it, instead of getting. I love it, and it's absolutely important. I think it's very inspirational that a lot of people found their way through your courses to their first property on the path of their financial freedom. Okay, final questions. I have quick hits lightning round for you. So whatever comes first to your mind, please let us know. One book or resource that made a big difference in your real estate career?
Oddly enough, it's Tribe of Millionaires. And I say that because I am a very lone wolf type of person. I always have been. And that really opened my mindset up to collaboration and how and why it's important to have that circle of people who can teach you, walk with you, and grow with you. That was something for me that it was a huge transition. Like I said, I've always just kind of been that person that did things on my own, and to realize the worth of having the right circle was kind of life-changing for me.
Surround yourself with the right people. Networking is your net worth. Your network is your net worth, right? So most important trait investors should develop.
Resilience.
Yeah.
This is
probably a great example of being kicked so many times and still coming back to real estate and making the best out of it.
I mean, guys, this is a messy journey. And if anybody's telling you it's not, I'm going to say it. They're lying to you. It is a messy, messy journey. And I mean personally and professionally, because all of those things tie into each other. You know, if you have a hard time taking a knock, you're going to have to get stronger. You know, this is not a
build that stamina.
Yeah, this is not a journey for the weak. And you're going to have a lot of ups and downs. And, you know, and I'm going to just kind of tie that back to make sure that you are surrounding yourself with the right people that are support you. They're going through the same kind of journey. We walk a very different life than other people do. And we take a lot of hard knocks. So having people that have literally walked in your shoes it's invaluable.
I love it. Absolutely. Okay. One thing that you wish you knew earlier.
That I didn't have to wholesale to get to where I want to be. Now, I'll take it with a grain of salt because I did learn great negotiation skills, sales skills, things like that, but I didn't have to do that. You truly can start your investment journey without anything. Put yourself in the right rooms with the right people and they'll show you how to get there.
Yes, but that was your path of progress. You had to start from there. And I think that's made you an incredible person as you are today with all this, you know, negotiation tactics and skills, conversational tactics. It's not only about negotiation, but find out what is the problem is there, how you can fix it to the seller, to the buyer, and find the common thread there. I love it. Okay, Angel, thank you so much. It was really good, packed with a lot of information and creative mastery class here. So if someone has a deal for you, if someone has a hotel or multifamily or even small residential, how they can get in touch with you to talk about it or to get your opinion?
Yeah, you can find me on any of the platforms, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. It's Angel Miller, the original, and same tag for all platforms. And also, if you're looking at us as a buyer, our operations website, rescue website, has our buy box on it. We keep our active buy box on there, so there's never any question of what we're buying. And that's operationsrescue.com. And just click on buy box and you'll always know what it is that we're open to buying.
I love it. Thank you again. It was great. I learned a ton and I will definitely look at your website and to keep continuing my education because I'm new to Sub 2. I heard it around. I never deal with Sub 2. I did some creative financing, but Sub 2 is still a little shaky because you said there's always risk. But you have to have a proper team. I probably didn't have a right transactional coordinator in my team, but now I have you and we can continue the relationship. Hopefully within a year, I'll be able to make you proud and make one Sub 2 deal and get it to the finish line.
Absolutely.
Well, yep. And for everyone who's listening, thank you for joining. Press like and subscribe button and leave your comment, a review, whatever you'd like. And, you know, the most important, keep moving forward.
Yes.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Angel.
Thank you.